As the US marks independence from the UK on the 4th of July, Rishi Sunak will also be marking independence from British government as he marches headfirst towards a landslide election defeat. So does he just want to get it over with and head to Miami Beach? Or is there any chance he can actually win? And if so, how?
Nick Bryant.
The British election looks like a Carry On movie, doesn't it?
Oh.
Do you have the Carry On movie in Australia?
Brilliant.
I mean, from Downing Street, you know, announcing in torrential rain, with somebody at the bottom of Downing Street with a boombox blaring out "Things Can Only Get Better," which was the theme tune, of course, of Tony Blair's campaign in 1997. Then he heads to the Titanic Museum. I mean, you just could not make this stuff up. Then he appeared the other day in front of a backdrop with two little black blobs behind him, which made him look like Mickey Mouse.
It's almost like his campaign is sabotaging him.
The spin doctors have almost become saboteurs, haven't they? It is. But it does look like they'll suffer a huge defeat. I mean, there is this talk that he wants to head over to Silicon Valley. There is this talk that he called the election early, fearing a leadership spill. Britain's had more prime ministers in the last few years than Australia has. We're winning the ashes of prime ministerial instability.
You are champions at it. Jen, you live in the UK. This election, is it all done and dusted? Is he really just trying to get out for the summer?
This is Labor's election to lose. So Labor is so far ahead in the polls, and frankly, I'd be pleased. My Dowdy Street colleague Keir Starmer could become the first fellow barrister Prime Minister of the country. But of course, I live there, and it is visceral there. The economic downturn and the despondency of young people. A recent study from Cambridge University showed that basic services in the UK, because of chronic underfunding under consecutive Conservative governments, has led to a lower standard of services than we saw in Eastern Germany, in the UK. And so I think there's a real sense that we need a change, and that people are suffering. You think about the cost of living crisis in Australia, it is so much worse. And of course it's a result of the economic act of self-harm that was Brexit, that is having a massive impact on the British economy, but it's also chronic underfunding as a result of Conservative policies. And we're seeing it, and you can feel it. And what I really hope is that young people come out to vote, because I think while Labor is well ahead in the polls, and it is for them to lose, there's a real concern about the way they're running their campaign.
It's a pretty small target strategy.
Small target. Will they? It's not a compulsory voting country. Will young people, will the Muslim voters come out and support them after what they've been saying about Israel and Palestine? These are really big questions.
I mean, that's the other problem. I mean, it's called a democracy. It's the mother of Westminster democracies. Non-compulsory voting. When Thatcher won the landslide, I think only 48% of the population bothered to turn up. And then you'll have a three-cornered contest with first past the post. So you could win, technically, with 34% of 40% of the people who bothered to turn up. So it's not really representative. So I think anything could happen in this election,
That's
really.
an interesting point. So you don't see it as a fait accompli?
Well, no, but because the vagaries of first past the post make it anyone. It's a lottery.
What's Keir Starmer like? I think you know him, right?
Keir is an excellent lawyer. He's a great barrister. But what's more important is the policies that Labor will put forward. And so for me as a human rights lawyer, it's important that we will see a Labor government that will support the Human Rights Act, that will support the European Convention on Human Rights, that will continue to respect human rights in this country. I mean, in the UK. Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives have done a huge damage to the British, to young people, to the economy, to human rights, some of the policies that they've been implementing. And I think Keir Starmer will be a better Prime Minister.
Interesting. Yeah, I suppose I've still got the image, Jonathan, of him announcing the election as the rain is falling.
Well, that was
on him.
Unfortunate, yes.
Was it?
Well, it's like when Neil Kinnock was knocked over by the waves. But then I think, why is it? Why have we got to the point where those sort of optics seem to genuinely affect the outcome of an election? Does the fact that someone has a press conference in the rain really alter their credentials?
Well, does it? Or do we just...
Well, I think it...
Well,
I
there was
think
a
that's
thought
the
that Ed
paucity.
Miliband once lost the election because of the way he ate a bacon and egg roll.
Well, with Tony Abbott and the Onion here was controversial for similar reasons, right?
More a reflection on the media's coverage of the elections than the politicians themselves. I mean, have we got to the point where those things are actually important? I mean, you know, in the old days, when you didn't have this sort of 24-hour news cycle, when you didn't have, you have to win the morning, you know, you only had to win the week, let alone the morning or the next 2 hours, people weren't as obsessed with this sort of imaging. When people didn't have their photographs taken more times than Churchill had in his entire life in an hour, I think it's very difficult to get any sort of long-term policy development or actually move beyond the optics of the politics.
But it does matter. I mean, he stood out there saying Labor doesn't have a plan, and the man didn't check the weather forecast.
Yeah, but...
It matters.
And it's mattered for a long time, because if you remember Richard Nixon debating with a 5 o'clock shadow.
Yeah, but he had a few more problems than that.
Well, he did, but not. But
I know,
that was
but it
that was
starts with the 5
before.
o'clock
That was
shadow.
before he was ever elected. But
What is Keir Starmer's agenda? Is he just small target? It feels to me like, correct me if I'm wrong, a bit like the last federal election here?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they've been looking at Albanese's success, the small target election, you know, the offer of safe change is the kind of message. They've also been trying to steal some of the Tories' clothes. They've been trying to say we're the government of economic competence, we're the government that, or we're the party of strong defence.
Again, that sounds like what happened here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, to win as a Labour politician, you've got to appear to be pretty conservative. And I think they've learnt that lesson. I think Jonathan makes a really good point about the frailties of British democracy. I mean, it's interesting how Britain has co-opted a lot of Australian politics. I mean, New Labour was really a kind of... it was a version of the Hawke-Keating years. The Tory party is absolutely fixated with John Howard's success, to the extent that they actually brought Lynton Crosby over. They called him the Wizard of Oz in Britain.
And they just took the term "stop the boats."
Yeah, and
They just took
exactly.
it.
They literally ventriloquised that term. But what I wish Britain would do is actually take some of, not your politics, but your democracy. Australia is a really innovative democracy, you know, in terms of coming up with preferential voting, in terms of proportional representation. You were the first country that allowed women to stand for Parliament. I used to be against compulsory voting, but nothing makes you keen on compulsory voting like spending 8 years in America. It's your safeguard against polarisation. There are some really good democratic ideas in Australia that could be exported around the world. I don't think you realise the extent to which you could become a global exemplar, not of politics, but of democracy.
Yeah, take our system, go to the AEC. Parnell, how does this reflect on the end of what could be, according to the questioner who says July the 4th is time to go to the US for Rishi Sunak? How will this period of Conservative rule in the UK be remembered?
Look, I think it's obviously going to be remembered for the hectic nature of prime ministerial turnover. But to Jonathan's point, you shouldn't call something over until it's really over in a situation like this. I think that there is strategy behind Sunak's decision to go to the polls at this stage, and that is that if you are in the UK at the moment, what you're seeing everywhere are protests on the street and social cohesion breaking down and things getting quite angry. I mean, Jewish people are being threatened in shops. Like, there is a sense that things are quite dangerous, and in moments like that, people will often choose to stick with the Conservative and to stick with the known, the existing quantity. So Keir Starmer, absolutely, he's playing small target, but he also has Labor hanging over his head. So he has Jeremy Corbyn still in the background somewhere. He has his colleagues who sympathise with some of these protests, which are getting more and more violent. And there might be a card to be played there. Now, if they can get the optics right.